So I'm going to start with a story. You have to imagine about 2 years ago, I'm sitting in a research session talking to a 20-something, very charming fellow named Matthew. And we are doing something that I often do with folks that I'm speaking with as kind of an icebreaker. I have them bring out their phone, and we're sitting right next to each other, and I have them give me a tour. Well, so what is this? Why is this icon here? Oh, that's interesting that you organize those that way. And he's going through and he's talking about that experience and walking me through all of his video apps. And he turns to me and he says, I know that I shouldn't spend so much time on my phone, and I know that I shouldn't be doing so much with technology all the time, and I have a hard time disconnecting. I'm seriously addicted, but it makes me really, really happy. And so imagine a movie version of this moment. He recedes into the background, and in my head, fireworks are going off, because I'm like, yes, he's hit upon this exact point. What is this conflict that we have between feeling bad about our use of technology and feeling really good about it? And so, of course, I did what anyone would do in that situation. I went to Google, and I typed in technology and happiness. And then just for kicks, I typed in technology and unhappiness. Got pretty much the same results. And a lot of unexpected things, like Werner Herzog's movie about Siberia. I've been to Siberia, I can tell you. Not a very happy place. But I put together I went through all of the findings and thought, well, it falls into a few different categories. One is that technology makes us really distracted, right? We can't concentrate. We can't be in the moment. We're too busy recording the moment. We are here at a conference, and you guys are all tweeting and texting. And if you go to YouTube and type in something like texting and walking, you'll find many tragic yet somehow hilarious videos of people, walking into poles and falling off subway platforms and the like. This is in Japan. They actually have a texting and walking lane. You can see that poor kid is right in the line of fire. It leaves us really disconnected from each other. So if you've read Sherry Turkle's book, you've heard this argument about how we can't relate to each other, yet somehow we're attracted to impossibly adorable fuzzy baby robot seals, which sounds pretty good to me, actually. Reality is not what it seems. Just go to anybody's Facebook page, and you'll see that they're a better version of themselves, right? And this bothers us, that it's not quite real. It doesn't quite jibe with our everyday experience. It might be, if you've read Nicholas Carr in The Shallows, making us a little bit stupid, We don't read anymore. We can't have conversations. We're always interrupted. We have a fear of it. This is from another session where we were talking about nomophobia, the fear of going without your phone. Now I don't know if that's a serious condition. If you go to nomophobia.com, you can take a little test and find out if you have it. Of course, you'll do that on your phone, I would imagine. It's been entered into the handbook that psychologists use to treat patients under addiction. And we're kind of complicit in this, right? Because we call people who interact with the technologies that we create users. Only one other type of user, I think, drug user, right? So when we have to go on detox, we have to get ourselves out, we have to refresh ourselves from technology. And so you look to fiction and you say, okay, maybe it's better there, but it's not. First, it's all happy and good, the robots are doing our work for us. We've kindly enslaved them to do whatever it is that we want them to do. And then it ends like this. And so I thought to myself, what the hell am I doing? I was studying Russian literature. Next on the list was Kung Fu. Then I was off to a career of international woman of mystery. And I instead got pulled into this technology thing, thinking it was inspiring and awesome and it was going to be great. Yet here I am making people miserable. So I'm going to drag you down on my journey. And you can see it looks pretty bad. We've actually been through the worst parts. So that's kind of the Stockholm Syndrome effect. And I'm actually in Stockholm, so that joke makes sense. That we're in it together. And I'm going to share a lot of what I learned through doing research about happiness and come away hopefully with some principles that we can use moving forward. So I started with myself, of course, obviously, and I thought, well, I can think of a few happy moments I've had with technology. I usually bring my pets.com sock puppet, but lately nobody's been remembering what pets.com is. And so you guys can go look it up and see all the funny YouTube commercials for that. And so, these you can see if you read along with these, half of these are experiencing moments, about half are maker moments. It makes sense, and if you guys think about it, you'll probably come up with some happy moments. Even if you go through your day, you'll probably have some happy moments where technology has had an impact. And then I looked out at what was happening in the world. Bhutan started it by creating a global happiness index, and other countries have followed suit, where they're tracking a number of different data points to understand, are the people who live in our country happy? And what can be done about that? And technology is one of the points that they are beginning to track. So my question, first of all, is it possible for happiness and technology to coexist? And of course, I approach this as a researcher and did way too much research on this. So you can see, I combined a lot of different data sources to find this out. And my first question was, does happiness even matter? Should I even care about this, or is this just a stupid question? And I've been tracking through online studies different kinds of metrics about the experience, like how easy is it for people to use certain things through task success or time? What are they going to do next? Are they going to return? Are they going to purchase? Are they going to recommend? And I snuck in a little metric about how do they feel in that experience. And it turns out happiness has this huge impact. It maps to thinking a site is better, being likely to return to the site, more recommendations, although you have to get pretty high in your happiness rating to recommend. And I cross-referenced this against social media sentiment. I said, okay, let me take my happy sites and see if they're really getting a positive sentiment score. They were. That's really promising. And so I said, okay, let me just look at these sites. And I pulled out two. And I said, okay, here's Expedia and Hipmunk. Which one would I think is going to make people happier? Can you guess? Yeah, I thought Hipmunk. Wrong. And so I was like, dang, I don't even understand what happiness means, apparently. Because the site that obviously shouldn't make people happy is making people happy. And so if you ask people, by all means, it should be Hipmunk, right? It's beautiful and colorful. It should be simple. So I realized, I can't really ask people what makes them happy because they're not going to be able to tell me. If I look at designers, because this is from Shutterstock, every year they collect all their search data and they publish it out. And they show what designers are interested in. And I thought, okay, that's not getting me very far. I mean, I can see that's the trends. Then I sort of fanned out, and I said, what about behavioral economics and positive psychology? They're developing models. I put Wi-Fi at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. He didn't have that one in there. I added that. And there's Martin Seligman's PERMA model. There's Caroline Riff's model of happiness. There's so many models. In UX, we have Delight. That's our model for happiness. And it's kind of that just little zing, all right, that we're supposed to get, that little wow. And in the constellation of all the things that we do, it's just this tiny little, kind of little piece of candy, a little dab of frosting that we put on afterwards to make sure that everyone's feeling good, right? So I I thought, okay, let's take a look at some of these delightful details. There's a lot of websites that collect these. Here's one of them. Do people really notice what the delightful detail is on the screen? Do you guys notice what it is? Well, it's supposed to be those little guys, those little faces in the empty seats on Virgin's seat selector tool. Nobody noticed that. Then I said, well, what if I get like a couple hundred people to remember their favorite sites and draw them and sketch them? People don't remember that much about their favorite sites, I learned. And a lot of drawings of the app icon, because that's their starting point, that's what they see, are very minimalist drawings like this. And there were a lot of gradations in what I was seeing. It's not just delight. It's not just this, oh my God, I'm so happy. But there's all these other moments mixed in. And I said, okay, what am I going to do now? And of course, I went back to asking people, and I asked several hundred, just open-ended, how does their favorite site make them feel? And then I asked another several hundred and gave them a bunch of options, looking at kind of emotion research and trying to create an emotional blueprint of, okay, what are those positive emotions? And I saw something like this, right? So happiness is actually not like, smile, be happy. It's kind of complicated. And a lot of this is not just pleasure, but it's purpose as well. And this goes along with the current line of thinking in other research areas where they're looking at happiness, is that happiness isn't just pleasure, it isn't just hedonism, but it actually has a purpose. And so, okay, the big question then, can we create more happiness from this knowledge? So we know that technology is making people happy. We know it's really important, that feeling that people take away from an experience. How can we create more of that? Because I don't want to be evil. I don't want to nudge people down the funnel. I'm not, even though my clients are big companies, I'm not that concerned with persuading people to do things that they don't want to do. But if happiness can actually be a benefit to everyone, how can we create that? And so by going through a lot of diary studies, and you'll see some quick examples here, identified 5 principles that really matter for happiness when we're looking at design. So the first is ease of use. That's kind of the building block. And that really resonated with me, and I think it does with you too. It's kind of the basic point, and we saw this in our larger data set, that without ease of use, there is no happiness. It's just not going to exist. You have to meet a baseline. You know, the meal has to be edible before you can really enjoy it, kind of thing. And it's the same kind of idea here. And ease of use encompasses a lot of different things. So this is why we see a lot of familiar sites at the top. If you go back and look at that data, you'll see Zappos and Amazon and Expedia and all these sites that aren't beautiful, but are familiar at the top, and people feel empowered. I can accomplish what I want to do. I feel a little bit less anxious about what I'm going to do for things that sometimes are anxiety producing, like finding health insurance, for instance, or even a sense of mastery where it's a little bit hard, but once you conquer it, the feeling of happiness is overwhelming. Trust is sort of the second building block, and this is where we realize, we can't do everything with design. Experience is broader than what we're designing. We had a lot of comments like this in the diary study that had nothing really to do with the Uber app, but it had to do with what was going on in the brand and in the news at that moment. But even so, there were some markers of trust that we saw along the way. Authenticity, the sense that this is not, as one person said to me, a lot of websites feel like it's a company talking to themselves about themselves. And people want to feel like, no, there's something real behind it, and that there's respect, not just for time or money. Privacy is wrapped up in there too. There are boundaries. And you're watching out for me. What I found from this is you can't really map people's journeys if you don't have their back, right? They want you to keep them covered and keep them inspired. And so maybe we'll get to this point with trust in our algorithms, where an algorithm feels like a friend. I thought this was so eloquent and so counter to what we hear a lot of times about algorithms, that there is that possibility. The third principle that we saw from all these examples of people posting their favorite moments, the moments of sort of highs and lows with technology, is creativity. And of course, this means making things. And we see this with everyone, making playlists, making flipograms, drawing on your Snapchat pictures and sending them out. But it means other things too. For instance, this is one of the happiest sites. It's a mortgage site. Mortgage is not happy, not fun. Yet, if you're able to play around and try things without risk, to be curious without any shame involved in it, like, oh, I feel bad that I clicked on that, or oh, is that going to be a credit hit when I click on that? That's important to people for their happiness. And then I think also, just to counter this, we saw how familiarity is so important to making people happy. But the paradoxical thing about all of us is that we get tired of things that once made us happy. It's called the hedonic treadmill in behavioral economics, and it applies here in our experience online, where it's a balance of sort of new discoveries and old friends that have to go together. You have to have a few surprises, and this is maybe where our notion of delight comes into play. Connection is the fourth principle, and I think it's one of the biggest ones and the most important principles of all. It's not just likes, but it's like-minded, a sense of belonging, a sense of presence, of other human beings are in there somewhere. It's not about the thing so much as the people. And of course, community and sharing an interest, and that can even go to the next level. I've done a lot of looking at micro-volunteering and how people help online, and there is that feeling of kind of a helper's high that goes along with this sense of community. Finally, meaning, the last big thing, and this is everything, right? It's continuity. There is no, to go back to our idea of addiction, and we need a digital detox, and we need to get away from technology. We're not really at that point anymore, and I think people are realizing that technology is so embedded in everything we do in our everyday lives. The experiences that acknowledge that continuity and bridge that gap that we're still feeling just a little bit are having the most impact on positive emotion. And anything that's connected with narrative, the bigger story. People want to be part of a bigger story. One of the most popular entries in all of our diary study was Humans of New York. And I guess this is because, I live in New York, so I know there's very little humanity going on from day to day, and I guess people are excited to see that, yes, there are other human beings with stories, and the stories are not complete. So I can wonder about it, and there's room for me to fill in the gaps, room for me to understand that. So I'll go back to Matt, who I started with. His dream was to swim with the dolphins. He told me about how his father had recently passed away and had missed out on experiences that he really wanted to undertake, and Matthew felt that he didn't want to live like that, and his dream was to live with the dolphins. And I asked him, well, how are you living out that dream? How are you pursuing it? Because he hadn't done it yet. And he said, I am trying to experience everything I can about it by looking at communities, by experiencing seeing how other people experienced it, by talking to people online. And I said, well, so now that you know so much about it, are you still going to do it? Are you still going to swim with the dolphins? And he said, of course. It enriches my experience. It doesn't replace that experience. So what are our takeaways here? Well, I think one thing is that if we're going to measure anything, we measure a lot of stupid things when it comes to our websites. But one thing we can measure to get a good gauge on our on what we're doing with technology is happiness. Everyone can speak to their own happiness, and that's an easy question for people to answer, and it gives us kind of a barometer of where people are at. I think we have to broaden our idea of happiness to be pleasure and purpose, realizing that positive emotions are going to result in some kind of positive action. But those positive emotions are maybe not as simple as we thought. And then finally, I think we can try to start designing to these 5 elements of happiness. Some of these we're already doing very well, most of us, addressing ease of use and even trust, and starting to think about it a little more broadly. So at this point, I feel like we've all been through this experience together. And so I always like to have some kind of bond at the end of my talk. So I'd like you guys to just raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I will always practice happiness first design. And with the power vested in me as speaker, I now pronounce you an awesome audience. Thank you very much. And for your enjoyment, my puppy.
Are you
will
really?
Does your happiness.
Are you really aware of what you promised now? Are you? Can you live up to that?
They can.
You think so?
I have absolute confidence in them.
Now, I'm your customer.
Okay.
Can I come to Change Sciences and say, hey, Pamela, I want to buy 20% more happiness. Can you do that for me?
Absolutely no. Of course not. You can't do that. And I think because it's an emotion and it's a feeling, it's imperfect. Like pretty much everything we know about our sites and apps, all of our data is imperfect. But what I like about it is that it's something people can answer. They know that feeling, and it's not complicated to say, do you feel sad or do you feel happy? You know it in that moment. So I think it's more of a barometer.
More seriously,
okay.
Tell us, what does Change Sciences do?
We're a firm that looks only at how people experience technology, and we do that through a lot of research that's conversations, like my conversations I've talked about here, and other kinds of research like diary studies, and then looking at data science and combining big data into the picture and trying to put together the pieces. I feel like it's a little bit like archaeology, except that, you know, our people are alive, so we can ask some questions still.
Do you have a typical customer?
It's really a range of everyone. And as you saw here, we're looking at everyday technologies. There's a lot of technologies right now that are mood trackers or quantified self kind of apps that are looking at happiness. I'm interested in that, but I'm not so much thinking about it in that way because I want to think about happiness in terms of what we're doing every day. We're banking, we're booking travel, we're listening to music, we're shopping. How can those experiences be more positive?
I think Annika has something from you here. Do you?
Yes. How does Angry Bird make people happy?
Okay, that's a really good question because right now gamification is something that's really important, and there's a lot of study about habit and how can we get people hooked on our idea and get them to, you know, keep coming back. What I found, and I didn't have time to cover here, is that because I'm asking people in general how happy they are as a person, because I wanted to see how much of an impact that had, people report their happiness differently. Some people are super happy all the time. I think I'm kind of one of those, like I'm overly happy. And then there are some people who are not. And so in the research I asked people, I used Sonia Lubomirski's guide for that, and found that the people who are less happy are actually more apt to play games. And I wonder if that's to make themselves more happy if there's something going on in that. And it's worth exploring. I don't know if I have the answer to that, though.
That's interesting. Pamela, you ran a workshop
I did.
yesterday?
I did.
Yesterday afternoon here in Stockholm.
Yeah.
Tell us a little what you did.
Well, let's see. We talked about kind of this is an example, really, of what we talked about. We talked about how to put together all the different kinds of data sources. We're all kind of drowning in this data that we have about our sites, about the people who use our sites, from sensors, from our analytics, from our research. How do we pull it together and get something meaningful out of it? And so we had some awesome workshop participants. High five, you guys, and virtual hug, and it was really, really great. I learned a lot. I hope they did too.
Okay. You are, I feel, you're a proof of the need for different competencies when you try to become better UX designers. Can we broaden that competence even more? Is there a need for more kinds of knowledge?
I think so. I mean, I'm already
improve?
seeing this at some companies. So when I was doing this research, because I'm not, I didn't start off, and I still am not an expert on emotion. I tapped, academic researchers, and then I was able to uncover people working within big organizations, like big financial organizations or other types of companies, and they have a team that has developers, designers, business people, UX strategists, and behavioral economists, and psychologists, and ethnographers, and data scientists, all working together. And I think that's probably something we're going to see more of.
Is there more, Annika?
No.
No? Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone.
I draw the conclusion that you're not going back to Russian literature.
Sadly, no. I occasionally reread a little bit.
It didn't make you happy?
That's paradoxical, isn't it? Because you don't equate Dostoevsky with happiness. But he did have a wonderful phrase that always sticks with me, that is, it's much easier to love humanity than to love the individual man or woman. And I think that's something that we can kind of take away and keep with us.
You've just heard Pamela Pavliscak.
Thanks, everyone.